Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're watching this from. I'm Martin Cross. This is Cross's Corner, and I have, a double world champion, amazing, in Cross's Corner tonight. Hi, Morgan Boulding.
Hi, Crossy. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm very good. I'm really excited that you're able to join us on Cross's Corner, and I think one of the things is I know. I mean, I kind of know you to like nod to and say hello to, but it's interesting in the men's A that you kind of fly under the radar a bit. I mean, even your biography on the British Rowing website's kind of pretty sketchy.
Yeah, it's probably my job to keep that up to date. So I imagine that's my fault for not updating that.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah,
blame British Rowing.
I think in the eight, the less the people stand out, probably the better things are going because we're all sort of working harmoniously, and it's better if there isn't one person standing out. I think that's how we sort of operate, which we enjoy.
That's a good team answer, actually. I like that. Tell me how your day's been today, Morgan.
Yeah, it's been good, thanks. Pretty standard day's training. Had a little meeting in the morning, which Paul likes to do to sort of set up the week. Informed us that because a lot of us trained quite well over the summer, we've actually got more training to do over the next couple of weeks because we're fitter than we thought we'd be. So we sort of shot ourselves in the foot a little bit there, but yeah, it's been good.
Do I take to mean by that you were training in your 3 weeks or so break?
Yeah, so you get 3 weeks off, and I think that's a really key time to reset mentally and physically as well. But I think you need a 3 week mental break from sort of the training environment, but not necessarily a 3 week physical break. So for me, that looked like a week of not doing much. I mean, I'm quite an active person, so I was out on hikes and stuff with my girlfriend, which was nice. But then after a week, sort of getting a bit itchy, wanting to do some training, and then kind of the last week of the 3 cracked on a bit more with it. Just sort of hit the ground running. It's already been sort of forced into our brains the 44-week season, where it's been closer to 50 plus in previous years. So, you can't start the season completely unfit. So no time to take 3 complete weeks off.
So it sounds like you were ready to come back.
Yeah. There's always an air of excitement over an Olympic year. Obviously, everything matters so much more, and that does add an element of excitement. But also, the last couple of years have been quite enjoyable in the team, and I think the sort of group of people we have sort of make the training. So I think that's been really positive. So yeah, it is enjoyable starting a new season.
Have you had the speech yet? I mean, it might not work like this, but I'm imagining Paul Stannard, the men's chief coach, will kind of go, right, everyone's seat is on the line. Nobody's safe. We start with a clean slate. Have you had that kind of speech yet, or is that not how it happens?
I wouldn't say that is how it happens, to be fair. I think those sorts of things are... Well, I'll start by saying that sort of at this level, I think a lot more of that sort of thinking is kind of left to us. I feel like we're high-level athletes, and it goes without saying that your seat isn't safe and you have to perform every single year. So I think there's a lot of trust in that he doesn't need to tell us that for us to know that. And, he kind of lets us deal with those sorts of scenarios and do our best, attempt at trials and proving ourselves. And I think he sort of offers a sort of he has an open door, so he'd rather you get on with it, crack on, and do what you want to do. But if you want to talk to him, go and have a chat if you're not sure about where you stand.
Yeah. I guess I know the answer to this, but how hard was it to make the men's 8 this season?
This season,
Yeah.
I mean, I'd say hard in terms of the trials is always difficult. Like, the trials are a long process, and that's the same every year. Like, no year is necessarily harder than any other because every trial you'll turn up and give it your absolute best. Sort of the years getting in at 2019, the first couple of years were quite challenging, maybe more challenging because there's more having to prove yourself. So maybe you end up in more testing. But getting into the 8 sort of the last couple of years has been tough in that there's serious talent across the whole team. Like, I don't think any sort of team would go to the Worlds with world champions as their reserves. So I think, it's getting more challenging in that you have to perform higher to get your seat, but with also, like, not necessarily as much maybe trials or testing as I've done in sort of 2019-20, which was 2 sort of mad seasons for me personally.
Yeah, you're a bit of a star in a pair now, aren't you?
I don't know about that.
Did were you second in pairs trials this year?
Yeah.
That's pretty star-like.
Yeah, no. Well, it's always hard to say how much of it was you and how much of it was your partner. I was
What
with
do you think, then?
Rory. What am I thinking?
Yeah,
I think maybe I'll give him 60% of the blame for that one. 60% of the credit for that result. No, I was with Rory, and I'm close friends with Rory, and we've always gone quite well as a pair. So yeah, we were chuffed with that result, but I think he's very, very strong, and I'd sort of the pairs combinations for the last couple of years have been. You sort of have to earn your pairs partner, which I've liked quite a lot. So you can go through testing. Whereas previously, I think sometimes the pairs combinations can be a little bit more random or based on other factors. Whereas what I've really enjoyed over the last couple of years is that, here's the testing, perform in these and earn the pairs partner to then go and perform with. So yeah, we both did quite well and got put together, and I was really happy to race with him.
We've got someone who's known to you who's asked a very helpful question here.
And why is it not Rory Gibbs? Fantastic question. Well, the reason it wouldn't be Rory Gibbs is because he has a very strong moral code, which is very hard to live by. So, you can have a very hard time impressing him sometimes with some of the things you do. If we take him off the table, there's not a single person in the team that isn't enjoyable to row with. But maybe this is maybe an obvious answer, but Harry, having a Cox is always nice. If you're rowing with Harry, you don't have to worry about the steering, you don't have to worry about anything else. So, and he'll keep you on the straight and narrow, which is good.
Right. Now, Phil at 8's, just to boot this question straight back at me, because it's a tough question. I know it is. So, and there's no reason you have to answer it at all. Would you like to see Ollie win Griffith and Tom George in the 8 next year?
Yeah, I think that is fully out of my hands. I think a lot of the time you can sort of float ideas in your head about the crews you'd want or who you'd want in your boat or this and that. But I think most of the time you've just got to put them out of your head because you have no control over them. And I think for us, we like not to focus on those things because, thinking about that is something that's out of your control and something that really you shouldn't be worrying about as an athlete. I think those two are very strong and the same as anyone else in the team. I'd be happy to have them in my boat, but in the same way that I'd be happy to have any man in the team in my boat.
Does this
not to say that I will be in the 8? Who knows?
Yeah. Do these answers come naturally to you, or have you been through a media training course?
That's fair. You're trying to ask some difficult questions.
No, you're doing very well.
No, those two are very, very strong. But I honestly don't know what's going to happen this year.
So again, tell me to get lost with this question. Was Charlie Elwes' absence in Lucerne the reason that the Australians won?
No, I wouldn't say so.
Okay.
I think Charlie as well, very, very strong athlete and very, very key in our 8. But as I said before, we've got a whole team of people who are really, really strong. And, he was replaced with someone who was equally talented. And, the way the selection goes in the team at the moment is quite savage because someone who is good enough to have a seat and be a world champion is not going to get selected at the end of the day. So, no, there were probably a few reasons that sort of contributed to that. I think, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves in the 8, and it's not always easy to be, on your top form every single race. And maybe we weren't quite, at our best in terms of just mentally going into it. But, maybe we were. Maybe the Aussies just had an incredible race, and, maybe they didn't show that sort of form at the World Championships. But, we have to give credit to them. They rode really well, and I think they backed themselves. And on that day, they were good enough.
And it was great. I think the final of the World Championships, I think more interesting in terms of the race until you got to 1,000, because the Australians really did believe they could beat you and go for the gold medal.
Yeah. I think,
in Belgrade, sorry.
Yeah, in Belgrade.
The final.
Yeah. Well, I think they were quite confident, especially going into Lucerne. I think they were confident. They obviously beat us in Lucerne, which must have sort of sowed the seed. Well, to be fair, like, we went into the Worlds as feeling as underdogs, which was actually quite hard compared to the year before. Yeah, really? Like in our own thinking, we'd much rather go into something like that and thinking that we might lose, as opposed to going in thinking we're going to win. And we certainly gave them a lot of credit going into the race, and were not assuming anything. So we were just going to deliver our best race and see where it took us. Unfortunately enough, it was enough that day.
Yeah. Talk to me about what happened at 1,000 meters, or round about 1,000 meters, because whatever it was seriously impressive.
Yeah, so I'd say, if we go back to Lucerne, I think we were pretty neck and neck. So the two boats were pretty much barrel to barrel all the way to the K. And then I think sort of maybe around the K, they moved a tiny bit. And then around maybe between the K and the 750, they all started shouting and sort of geeing themselves up. Nothing wrong with that. But they were really up for it, and they were sort of taking chunks out of us and got themselves maybe quarter, third of a length that, was unsurmountable to us at the end. I think we started coming back in the last few strokes, but they'd clearly dug in deep in that bit and got enough of a margin. And then at the World Championships, we've sort of seen them do that, and we're expecting it to happen. And sure enough, a little bit earlier, it was happening. And coming into the K, they were shouting, and took a couple of seats, which I think you saw. They sort of one shot they were coming sort of through us. I think they maybe got 2 seats ahead, and then because we were sort of ready for that, I think we all got quite excited ourselves. And then after the K, we gave them some shouts back, and just sort of put in some of our hardest strokes, and it was enough to sort of creep away a little bit, which kind of gave us some momentum.
I don't know, it may be a trade secret, Morgan. Can you give us a flavour of what kind of things get shouted? And how responsible are you for these shouts?
I think I gave one shout. I think there was more coming from behind me from Jacob, who did a very good job. There's no trade secrets. And to be honest, none of us can really produce a very coherent word or hear anything that's being said from behind. So it's more about the noise as opposed to what's being said. Maybe a bit of swearing. Something, God knows.
So I don't know the answer to this question, but what's it like being world champion second time round?
It was I think it was quite relieving to get through a different scenario and a more difficult season. I think the first season, it was always waiting for the competition to come to us, because I don't think there was the standard at the first World Cup in Belgrade in 2022 wasn't very high. And I think it built through the season towards the end. By the end, we were sort of defending the win. Whereas this season, it felt really good to be under the cosh a little bit and be really tested in Lucerne and beaten, and then come back from that. So, it was fantastic to cross the line first and, have done it for another year. But it's always bittersweet thinking, those other crews are very, very strong. The Dutch really came at us in that last 500 meters, and we're just thinking to the future and how we can stay as strong as possible going forward. So, enjoyed the moment while it lasted, but I was like pretty soon thinking about,
you lot don't get much fun, do you? In terms of like,
I think sometimes rowing isn't very fun. I think you've got to knuckle down. And the people who are willing to suffer more are the ones that end up ahead.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You talked about the Dutch there. I was minded when you were talking because they did finish fast in Belgrade. Also, they finished very fast in 2022 at the Munich European Championships.
Yes.
How much are you aware of crews coming up, or is your head just in the boat?
We have a huge focus. I mean, what I told you about the race in Belgrade about sort of shouting at the K sort of contradicts this, but we like to have a big focus on ourselves, especially for the first K. So the first K, we try and keep it as internal as possible, and we're trying not to look out. We're trying to deliver our best race plan. And when I first got in the 8, this is coming from sort of Steve. And when I first got in the 8, I remember Rory telling me from behind, because he was in the bow seat and I was in the 2 seat, maybe at the Lucerne Regatta, that my head was like an owl. I was sort of looking out, like wondering where everyone was, because, the first World Cup, the standard wasn't as high. And the second World Cup, all of a sudden, we've got the Romanians, we've got the other nations next to us. And I'm sort of looking out and, in the heat, I was looking out way too much. And he sort of told me, and I was thinking, yeah, why am I looking out? We've got a fantastic Cox telling us exactly what's going on. And really all we need to do is produce a first kilometre that's as fast as we can go without dying off in the second K. So really, what am I looking at? So to tell you the truth, we don't see much in the first K, maybe the first 1500. But if you're leading coming into 500 to go and someone starts coming at you, you sort of start looking a bit to the side, and trying to fend them off. Especially in the bows, there's sort of a bit of something that you sort of get used to at university is you feel like you're up more than you are. If you're in the bow seat and you're on the bow ball, you're only a seat up. Well, maybe a couple of seats up. Yeah. So you start like sort of overcompensate for that, I think, in the bows, because if you see someone coming at you, you see their bow ball anywhere near you, you start panicking. Panicking, but you start laying down some bigger strokes. I think to go back to your question, at Munich, I don't think we noticed them because they just caught a crab, so they were quite far behind. Yeah. But when we look back at the data, we are aware that their 1500 from after the crab was the same speed, if not faster than ours. So, going into the Worlds, we were ready for them to be a quick crew.
Yeah. You talked about rowing up in the bows there. Again, I'm aware I'm phrasing this in a particular way. Why are you in the seat that you are in the 8, which is the 2 seat, as opposed to any other seat on stroke side or anywhere else? What is it that suits you to that seat and other people to different seats?
I think there's probably a couple of things. I think coming from Brookes, my rowing was quite like how to phrase it, sort of effective in the drive phase, but maybe a little bit we'll call it economical in the recovery, where I'm sort of just like making it as easy as possible without sitting up, following the correct body positions. So I think my rowing is sort of molded from that since sort of Steve has sort of taken charge of me as an athlete, as he's my coach with my individual boat at the moment, and tried to make us row, a lot more efficiently in the recovery as well as the drive. And as someone who wasn't necessarily doing that as well as other people, I think it's quite good for me to sit behind them and be able to follow what they're doing. So that I think that would be one of the reasons. Someone like Tom Ford is very good at, setting up the sort of model that we need to follow behind. And it's better that he's further forward, setting that to follow from the people behind. But also, I've always done quite well in the sort of bow seat of pairs. The bow seat of pairs is sort of my strong suit. So I think that maybe that suits sitting in the bows of an 8 as well. I'm also lighter generally, and less strong than some of the people in the middle. So, that is just kind of like characteristics of the 2-seat.
Yeah. You mentioned Steve Turner, obviously coach of the men's
Strathmore.
8. Sorry, Steve Turner. Steve Turner was in the squad with me, and he's a big supporter of British Rain. So sorry, Steve Trapmore. Yeah. Steve Trapmore, your coach, what does he bring to the crew?
So one of my favourite things about Steve that he does bring to the crew is that he is the hardest working coach I've probably ever seen. If there's ever anything on his end that he can do, it'll already be done. And then it just kind of like, I think that probably stems from him having gone through it all before. Obviously got an Olympic gold medal. He's got a work ethic that is almost only known by athletes who have been through all of that. And what that sort of does for us, it's not necessarily what he achieves with that hard work. I mean, obviously that's important, but it's also the fact that we sort of look at that and we think, he's delivering his best effort to coach us and to support us. So why would we let him down with a half job from our end? So that sort of idea, that sort of culture of, doing absolutely everything you can begins with the coach. And then it's passed through Harry, who also works very hard. Even though then those two aren't working physically, they're really showing that they're putting everything they've got into this project. So for us, we just want to replicate that and, keep working hard ourselves in all the ways, not just, in training, but all the things we do outside of training, like eating and sleeping and resting up when we can, are sort of part of our culture now because of that.
How do you fancy going through your crew and talking about each person's personality and what they bring?
Yeah, well, there's 8 other people, so it'll take a little while.
Yeah, you can be succinct. That's all right. They won't mind.
I think Harry is very, like, what makes him a good Cox is he's doesn't take any shit from any of us. Like, he sat in front of 8 massive lads who have some pretty big personalities, but he puts us all in our place, and he's very good. Like, you might assume this from a Cox, but he's very good with his words, and he knows the right things to say and the right point. And in terms of personality, I think he's good fun, and he's jokey when he needs to be, but when it's time to put one of us in our place, or we're pissing around too much, he'll put us in our place, which is good.
Yeah.
40 is much the same. He's very very sort of experienced in the crew, so I think he's ranked one of the top athletes in the world based on his performances at World Championships.
Oh, that's an interesting fact.
Well, I think isn't there a ranking? I think he might be 6th. I think rugby 7th.
Yeah.
From the number of events they've done and done well in. So those two are very experienced. I think Rudkin holds a sort of soft spot for everyone in the 8. I think he takes some chat quite well, which is good, and he's just a very very nice person to have around.
Why is he in the 7th seat?
I think from what I've said before, I think he delivers the model close to the model which Steve wants people to row. So I think he does a very good job of setting up what we the way we want to row. So him and 40 in the Sterns, I think, do a very good job of giving us something to follow. And yeah, I think he's a very good athlete, and I respect having him in the 7th seat.
Yeah.
Digby, like me, has a lot of similarities with me. I think we both have ADHD. Him and I have to be, well, maybe not diagnosed, but we're close to having ADHD. Him and I always have to be doing something. So he's part of our coffee club, so we always make coffees in the break, and quite often you'll find a half-made coffee left in the machine because he's been busy doing that, and then something else has popped into his head, so he's run off and done that, and you'll find the coffee waiting. But yeah, Digby's an absolute legend, and he's a really valuable person to have in the crew in terms of just a nice guy, and someone that you always know has your back. Which I can say about everyone in the 8, to be honest.
Yeah.
Charlie's great, obviously very strong rower, but I'd say his strength and his sort of size. What is he? He's 6'6". He's the biggest man in the boat, but he's the classic gentle giant. So sort of a contradiction. He's very very chilled and very sort of laid back. Almost too much sometimes. He can miss the odd meeting by a minute or two. But then I'm guilty of that as well, to be fair. And then you've got sort of who's behind Charlie? Sholto, yeah. Yeah. No, Sholto is good fun to have around as well. Big member of sort of Balfour and sort of chat that comes from us. We sort of band together because we call it being in the trenches, because we're not really we're not involved in the big decisions being made up in the stone. We sort of just get our heads down and just get on with it. So we have a bit of chat with him. And then Rory, obviously I'm good friends with him. I think he's very, very he's very witty. I think he's very, very quick to come up with good ways to give people chat, and he is easily the funniest man in the boat.
Yeah.
So if he wasn't in the boat, I think it would be a less enjoyable sort of project to be a part of. And then there's me, as I said, sort of ADHD, bordering on ADHD, late to some of the meetings sometimes because I can be quite laid back as well. But I like to think that I'm lighthearted and try and sort of not be too serious if things are getting a bit stressy in the boat. So I think that's one thing I try to bring. And then Jacob behind me is just one of the loveliest guys I know. Yeah. Really, he's like tough and aggressive when he needs to be in racing, but he is laid back and chilled most of the time. So, in the bows, it can be sort of quite relaxed vibes and just enjoying being part of the group.
That's fantastic. Well, that's really well done. Obviously, we were talking about Steve Trapmore just before that. I think you're both Walton Rowing Club boys, aren't you?
Yeah, we are. I used to row in the Steve Trapmore quad.
Oh, you're kidding?
At Walton. So I sort of knew his name before I sort of knew of him. I sort of came from a very sort of low-key rowing background. So I didn't know all the Olympic champions. I didn't know all of the big rowers until I sort of moved away from that. So I didn't even know who Steve Trapmore was until I was in his boat. And I was like, who's this guy? He's got the Olympics. And then obviously got to know him much better through my career.
So you were at Heathside School, which is the local school in Walton. I mean, how come you ended up at the rowing club?
So basically, I grew up in Cornwall.
Oh.
I was brought up by my grandparents, who lived in Bodmin. So my local club was called Castle Door Rowing Club, which is one of the only non-gig rowing clubs in Cornwall. And I sort of got into rowing because my uncle's a rowing coach at Walton Rowing Club, Ken Roberts, and he sort of sowed the seed of rowing in my head. He took me out in a big fat what they call Mondegos out on the river, tied to a rope, and we didn't really do much, but that sort of sowed the seed. And then when I was 11 years old, the opportunity to join my erg club, it was called, at Bodmin College came up, and I thought, well, I've done it a little bit, I'll go have a go. So I spent few months going to erg club, and I wasn't very good at it because I'd be part of erg club, and then kids who never touched an ergo in my life used to beat me at rowing school rowing competitions, which wasn't very good. So I sort of stuck at it, and by the time I was 15, Nick DeCarter, who was a great presence at Walton Rowing Club at the time, I think he was bringing some of the best juniors around into Walton Rowing Club. And through Ken, my uncle, he'd sort of got me to come down, sort of travel up from Cornwall to Walton Rowing Club. And in my J16 season, in my J15 season, I'd sort of commute. If there was a race, I'd travel from Cornwall up to Walton-on-Thames, which is maybe like 4 hours, to go do a small boat's head or something up there, and just sort of see how good I was. And then he said I was, I was a bit ropey. I didn't really know the technique, so my blades would be up in the air. I wouldn't really be doing much useful. But I kept getting put into quads with really good juniors, as I said, because he was sort of bringing juniors from around the country, well, around the Thames Valley area to Walton. So I got to row in some really great boats. And then when I turned J16, I decided to do sixth form. I move in with him, my uncle and aunt in Walton-on-Thames, to do to row, basically. So I moved in with them, rowed for 2 years at Walton Rowing Club, which really was invaluable. Like my rowing club in Cornwall was fantastic, and they did a lot for me. But the facilities up further country, there's more crews, there's more people. The standard is generally higher, so it's an easier place to learn. So I moved to Walton, did 2 years there, and in my second year, I managed to sneak into the junior wilds. I think I was still probably rowing a bit ropey. I certainly wasn't an established technical oarsman at that point. And I think at Brookes was when I really started to sort of develop a bit more.
Yeah. So we'll talk about Brookes in just a moment. So are you a proud Cornishman?
I wouldn't say I'm a proud Cornishman. I think a lot of Cornishmen think it's its own country.
Yes, that's why I asked, really.
Yeah, no, I don't really. You can probably tell from my accent, I'm not much of a.
No.
Not much of the Cornish accent sunk in, and I'm not too.
I don't know if you know them, but I think Annie Vernon was Cornish, who was in
she was at my club. She
not
Walton, Castle Door Rowing Club.
Yeah, and
Ed Code. Ed Code.
Yes.
Yeah, I think Ed Code actually lives 5 minutes down the road from where I used to live in Cornwall.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
Right. So we're going to talk about Brookes now, which is obviously a big thing in British rowing. Why did you choose Brookes, and what was it like going from the training you were doing at Walton and whatever to the Brookes system? How did that introduction hit you?
So yeah, I went to Brookes because they were one of the best universities for sort of my course, which is real estate, which isn't done by a lot of the sort of other universities. And obviously the rowing. I think most people who sort of end up in the rowing team have gone there for the rowing a lot of the time. So yeah, that's how I ended up there. And also Henry Bauhash-Webb is a sort of incredible recruiter, and he sort of told me the positives. And from what he was saying, like compared to other universities, they had a lot to offer on the rowing front. They were sort of, I think they were not up and coming. They were doing very well when I went there, but they were still on the up, like on the big ascensions. So, I could see things were going very well there, but there was an exciting future. And the year I went there, so many other people went there who ended up sort of being very good oarsmen. But the sort of the way Brookes is done is very different to Walton. Obviously at Walton, it's just like a few juniors in the sort of high performance side of the club. So it's sort of like training by yourself or with one other person, and sort of quieter, getting on with it yourself and self-guiding your training a lot of the time. Whereas Brookes is sort of massive, loads of athletes and sort of big group teamwork sort of opportunities where you've got to fire up your team and they're looking after you as well. So that was a massive change in terms of culture.
The training's quite competitive, isn't it?
Yeah. I'd say one of my favourite things about the programme at Brookes is you will always be where you deserve to be. I feel like Henry will use metrics that you sort of know he's using, and he'll be looking at you in a sort of objective way. So you'll sort of always know where you stand at Brookes. And if you're not performing, you'll be in the third eight. And that's just it. There's no egos at Brookes. So if you're doing well, you'll be in one of the top boats. If you're not, you'll be straight back down the next day. So that's one of my favorite things about Brookes, was that you always knew where you stood, and it was all quite sort of logical. Do better and you'll have a seat.
So where did you begin to fit into the whole Brookes the first 8, second 8, third 8 from when you arrived, how long did it take you to progress?
So I sort of started off very well. When you get to Brookes, you start again. Like, as I said, I went to Junior Worlds, but quickly you turn up at Brookes and it's like, that means absolutely nothing. No history tees you up for anything. So you start from square one. And actually, the first couple of months, I did very well. I'm not really sure why. But I pulled a good half hour. I was doing quite well on the water. And by some miracle, I ended up in the first 8 at my first Brit Champs.
Wow.
I think I was sat behind Pete Chambers. And that was a bit of an experience. Like, me at that point, he was like just like an absolute hero in the rowing world, and I couldn't really believe that I was sort of sat at British rowing with someone from the squad. So actually, that was a fantastic opportunity for me to sort of learn from him and learn from the other guys like Matt Tarrant, Scott Durant at the time, who were all in the team. So that was an incredible opportunity. But I think that was short-lived. I don't think I was actually good enough to be there. I'd had a good couple of months start to the season. Maybe I'd done more training over the summer and then sort of settled down into the second 8, sort of third 8 area in my first year at Brookes. So had work to do from that point.
Yeah.
And then fully got in the first 8, in the next year in 2015.
Yeah. Where does Richard Spratley fit into the whole Brookes system?
He's just always there. Like he does more stuff behind the scenes than you sort of see. I think Henry's sort of the front. As an athlete, Henry's the front. He's telling you what to do, guiding the training a lot of the time. And Spratley is sort of dealing with more of the behind the scenes stuff. But he's always there as a presence, which is always, quite influential on the athletes. He's obviously been doing it a long time, and I'd say his input is less direct, but always important.
Yeah. What is the aspiration in terms of when you rock up at Brookes, or maybe like you said, you get into the first 8 in your second year? I mean, are you saying, right, we're going to win the ladies' plate at Henley, or is it, eventually I'm going to get in the Olympic team? I mean, where were your sights set in terms of rowing at Brookes?
I think when you get to Brookes, one of the first things Henry told me was that you'll enjoy the process of racing at Henley and trying to win Henley more than anything else in your rowing career. And that has rung true. You do sort of your under 23s, and a lot of people are very focused on that. But I think my fondest memories of going through the system was Henley Regatta and working up to that. And when we got to Brookes, as I said, I'd sort of settled down into the second, third 8, and some of those people in 2014 won the Temple that year and sort of were not eligible. So 2015, a whole 8 of new guys stepped up. People like Rory Gibbs were in it. Was Matt Aldridge? Yeah, Matt Aldridge was in it at that point. So the sort of names that are far in the team now.
Yeah.
And we didn't really... I certainly didn't think we were very good. Like I sort of thought, I'm only here in the first 8 because the other 8 people can't do it. And, I don't exactly expect much. And then the first sort of major race came round where we were racing a lot of competition, which was 8's head. And I think we came 4th. I think our sort of student 8 came 4th, only a second off the sort of Caversham first 8 with Matt Tarrant and some of the big boys in it. So we were sort of thinking, my goodness, like maybe we are okay. So we kind of just stuck with it, and that ended up with the nearest race in Henley, which was very close. But we were, a canvas off being Temple winning standards. So from there, we just sort of built through the steps of winning the Temple in 2016, and then the next site was the ladies. And I'd never say my aim was to get in the team. When I was in my first years at Brookes, it was almost I'd love to get in the team and I'd love to go to the Olympics, but I'm not going to know if I'm good enough until years down the line. So let's do the next step. And eventually I've ended up where I am now.
Yeah. So when you got in the team from Brookes, how did the training program that you encountered at Caversham, which I guess was Jurgen Grobler's training, because you were basically in the team back when Jurgen was running things. How did what you were doing at Brookes differ from Caversham, and how much was a step up, was it, or how straightforward was it to get into that system?
Straightforward to get in terms of adjust to the trainings, you mean?
Sorry, I should have made that more clear.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I mean.
Yeah. So when I first arrived at Brookes, the training was very time efficient. Like, we're obviously university students, so I think the program did very well at, fitting all the training into one session, going hard and then going home, and making the most of a 2-3 hour block so that you could, go and spend time at university or doing other things. So it'd be a lot of intensity, low mileage, I guess. And, battle paddling in 8's would incentivize pulling hard, which was, always lead to effective in terms of time training. But then towards the sort of last couple of years of my time at Brookes, Henry sort of developed more of a sort of Olympic pathway squad, which would try and sort of mirror the training that we do that we would try and get into at Caversham. So the mileage went up a lot. It turned into 3-session days. We'd be doing close to sort of 200k a week.
Really?
Yeah. So we'd end up doing sort of the best training we could do, which really did tee us up well for the team, because by the time me and Rory sort of followed our story together, like we were sort of both trying to get in at the same time. We were in the pair together when we were trying to get in. So we spent 2 years solidly trying to get in and struggling to sort of break through that final sort of hurdle into Caversham. But through that time, we were doing tough training. We were doing 3-session days. And by the time we sort of got to Caversham, we were sort of used to it. So we were able to hit the ground running. Like, a lot of people say that you get in the team and the first bit is really tough and, you're always tired and a lot of illness, like trying to keep up with the training. But, we, coming from a higher volume sort of end to our Brookes program, we actually dealt with it all right, I think. And I found the training in my first couple of years in the team okay. The testing was the tough part, sort of trying to prove yourself. And that took a lot out of us at times. But the training itself was okay.
How did your 2K erg scores evolve, like, during that period? And what are you now able to do?
So I'll give you, this is obviously we're not supposed to talk about.
Yeah.
I'll give you, I'd say I'm probably smack bang average in the middle of the team at the moment on my 2K ergo. So sort of,
Are we talking high 40s or low 50s?
I'm not in the 40s yet.
Okay. Right.
I think my PB was 5:55 when I got into the team. And I literally got that just before I got into the team. I think an ergo was a big factor of getting into the team through Jurgen. And 5:55 wasn't a sort of break the door down score, but it was sort of enough to sneak in. I think I hadn't progressed too much, so I've progressed a bit since then. But it took a couple of years to be able to sort of achieve good scores with a lot of training fatigue in the legs.
Yeah.
So that was the biggest sort of hurdle. Like, I feel like I was dealing with the training, but being able to deliver a good PB sort of 2K was difficult until I'd been in the team a couple of years. But yeah, I've improved it a solid amount since then.
Yeah. So you were in the World Champs in 2019. You made that boat in the pair that came 12th. So I guess the top 11 pairs, were they qualifying for the games?
Yeah.
So that must have been a real pisser.
Yeah, that's not ideal, is it? The 2019 season was a really, really tough one for us. So me and Rory got into the team in April. I think we came fourth final trials, which is not a bad result for someone outside the team. And as I said before, my ergo wasn't quite as strong as Rory's, and I think we got into the team, but I was almost on the back foot, and he was sort of on the front foot, and he was given some seat races to get into the 4, which he absolutely smashed. And but by the end of sort of testing, he was sort of like proved himself as one of the top outsiders. Whereas I sort of wasn't given the opportunity in the 4s testing, so I got put into sort of different sort of testing where it was almost fight to survive in the team. So we ended up in the sort of pairs group where we were doing a lot of testing, and sort of if you don't win, you're not going to be in the team anymore. So we did a few bouts of that, which was tough work. And then by the time, I think it was the 3rd World Cup, it was Rotterdam at the time.
Yeah, oh God.
And no, we weren't told anything, but that was we sort of saw that as our opportunity to get selected as a pair. It was me and Tom Jeffrey in the pair against Harry Glenister and George Rossiter, who came 3rd at trials. So they were another very strong pair. And we sort of seen that as our opportunity. And the first round was a time trial to get selected for the semis.
Yeah.
And we got into the AB semis. Oh, no, sorry. We got a draw in the semis through our time trial, and then got through the semis. And then we'd seen that because they'd not gone as fast in the time trial, they'd got a very difficult semi. I think they had the Sinkoviches, the Aussies, and another crew. But then the Sinkoviches, so we were thinking we were looking good to be selected in the pair, or at least the first sort of step towards that. And then I think the Sinkoviches pulled out, and then Harry and George ended up beating us in the final. So from that point on, they were sort of the pair that was going to go forward, and we were the pair that was going to be spare from that point. So we went into the next step was Silveretta. And Silveretta, me and Tom had nothing to lose. We were basically going as hard as we could, whatever piece it was. If it was UT1, then we'd be going as hard as we could. UT1 is supposed to be sort of a zone where you're sensibly training, and we were just, if the stopwatch was out, we were going as hard as we could.
Yeah.
Silveretta, my first Silveretta, is already going to be a hard camp. But because we were trying to prove ourselves, it was on the ergo, I was going as hard as I could, and on the water, we were going as hard as we could. And we sort of showed through Silveretta that we had promise as a pair, even though we'd lost in Rotterdam in challenging conditions. We sort of showed that we were capable of more than that sort of showed. And by the end of Silveretta, we were pretty happy with ourselves, but, tired after 2 weeks at altitude, absolutely batting it out against the other pair. And by the next step was the sort of taper camp in a Viz.
Yeah.
And that leads into the Linz World Championships. But off the back of that, they decided that we needed to race off for the pair against George and Harry.
Yeah.
So where everyone else is sort of sharpening up and tapering and getting ready for the World Championships, we were gearing up for sort of racing for our lives, for my first GB Vest and Tom trying to get into the pair. So a few days into the Aviz camp, we sort of lined up on a very gloomy crosswind on the course in Aviz, which is not a very good course. It's got 2 lines of buoys that are really far apart. And then we'd sort of straddle one line of the buoys because there's not proper lanes. So we both basically lined up, no stake boats, and came forwards and started our race off like that. And I think Tom took me down over 40 the whole way.
Bloody hell.
We both, I think we got out to maybe like a 3/4 length lead and sat there until maybe 500 meters to go. And then it got pretty biblical towards the end. They started sprinting at us and we were sprinting as well, but barely holding them off. And then as we sort of got to the finish, me and Harry Glenister are both very sort of dynamic athletes. So maybe we're not as strong in the middle, but we've got quite a good sprint. And we are obviously, he's on bow side, I'm on stroke side. So we're coming down the buoys following this middle buoy line, but I'm pulling my partner around one way. Not to say if I've pulled harder in the race. He's pulled me along in the middle, and it's my turn to put it in at the end. And our pair is going off this way, and their pair is going off that way, away from the buoy line. We probably finish about 100 meters apart that way.
Bloody hell!
But the margin itself was only, I think it was half a second, 0.6, that me and Tom beat Harry and George by, and they were a fantastic pair. And I think if we'd run that race more times, they'd have won it 5 times out of 10. So it was tough. Off the back of all the testing after April trials, the Silveretta, and then that, I think we just sort of run ourselves into the ground. So by the time we got to the Worlds, we didn't have much more to sort of give, and the sort of project at that point sort of got worse and worse. And I don't like to give excuses. We weren't good enough, and we didn't deliver a Olympic qualifying place. So, that was tough, but we gave it our best across the project, and it wasn't good enough.
Yeah, there's loads of things I could ask you, but I'm just conscious of time and so on. But I kind of wanted to ask you about the Regatta of Death and the whole Olympic spare thing.
Yeah, of course. It's not a sore subject.
No, I realise that, but because I've never raced in that sort of environment before, which people call the Regatta of Death. And I've not had the experience of being, spare in a team, which I think, were you a travelling spare to Tokyo?
I was a travelling spare.
Okay, so you talk to us about that regatta and your experience as travelling spare.
Yeah, so the regatta itself was, it was a tough few days. I think Harry and I delivered our sort of best race we could. I think it was pressure like we hadn't really dealt with before. But I think we dealt with the pressure itself fine. I think we just got into the final and we weren't good enough in that final. The Danes, who ended up getting a bronze medal, qualified ahead of us, and we'd actually beaten them at the round before. We'd beaten them in the World Cup. No, the Europeans.
Yeah,
we'd beaten them in 2 races there, but we were under no illusions. Like, we knew it was a big step up in terms of what everyone does, and it really was. Like, every crew there was finding another gear. So we went up against the Dutch, which was a very strong pair, and the Danes. And on the day, we just weren't fast enough. I think we struggled a little bit with basically the conditions were forecast to be very bad.
Yeah.
So I think the semi was 2 hours before the final, or something ridiculous like that. So we raced the semi and we actually beat the Danes in the semi. Maybe they were playing games. Maybe they had a stronger final. But yeah, couldn't.
I bet they weren't.
You don't think they were?
No.
Well, who knows? Who knows? But in the final, they had more to give than us, and we couldn't quite do it. I think me and Harry were a strong pair, but I think, as I said before, we're both quite suited to the bow seat of a pair, and I don't think our combination necessarily delivered the best of us.
Yeah.
But, I have absolutely no regrets through the project, and I think we both gave it our all, and I think I trust in Harry that he gave it his all, and I didn't come away from that regatta particularly sad. Obviously, I'd have loved to have gone to the Olympics, but we gave it our all. There was no stone left unturned in the project to get there, to get to the Olympics. So the fact we didn't qualify was just, unfortunately, we didn't have the speed to do it.
Did you get a bag full of kit for going to Tokyo?
Yeah, so we got the same as everyone else. I quite enjoyed the process of being spare, because at that stage we didn't qualify the pair, and then we stayed out in Lucerne, in which I was spare 4, and then I got to fill in for Ollie and Griffith in the 8.
You sat at 3 in the 8, didn't you, or somewhere?
Yeah,
like
I
that?
got to sub into the 8, and he gifted me a nice World Cup bronze medal, gold medal, which was my first, and we had a very easy race against the Germans, and won by 0.03 seconds, I think.
Oh, wicked.
The craziest races I've ever been in. So yeah, I think my ability to put the qualification regatta behind me and, you know, just focus on being spare almost immediately afterwards paid off, because, you know, it's easy to sit in an eight of 9 people and think, you know, my contribution to this isn't that important. You know, I'm only a small fraction of the boat, but, you know, that day it did. And I turned around from the Olympic qualifications, got my head on sort of being the best spare I could be from that point on.
Yeah.
Had I not done that, I wouldn't have won that race. And that might even have teed me up to be selected going forwards, because, you know, I replaced a very strong stroke sider, and we still managed to deliver a good race against the Germans. So I think that was me proving that, you know, despite us not qualifying the pair, there was still something to be said for my ability in a crew boat. And then I was in the pair with Matt Tarrant for to be the spare for the Olympics.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm not going to say it was easy being at the Olympics as spares, but, you know, I think it was a fantastic experience, and we got to enjoy it with a slightly less pressured environment. And yeah, I think I enjoyed it.
Yeah. So one thing which is kind of interesting to explain is how come a bunch of people who haven't rowed together before can come into the team at that level in 2022 and be world champions.
I think that is testament to not just the talent of the people coming up, but the sort of culture they brought. I think I've noticed in myself, it's harder the longer you're in the team to be the positive influence on the culture that you maybe were the first day you got in the team. And sometimes I check myself and I think maybe I'm not being as positive for my crewmates as I should be, as I was maybe when I first got in the team. And those guys just had an absolutely unbelievable sort of work ethic, attitude, sort of culture that they brought with them, which really just sort of lifted the team up. And I think was probably one of the biggest factors in us doing well that summer. Everyone wanted to do everything they could to make the boats go as fast as possible. And there were no sort of egos. There was no one who was thinking, you know, I know what's best. I'm the most experienced. I'm the guy that you should listen to. It was, you know, here's our boat. How should we row? The coach tells us what the pattern is he wants us to row. And then every single one of us is buying into that. We're buying into the cocks, or we're buying into the man making the calls if we're in a smaller boat, and we're delivering on that rather than, you know, getting our egos in the way, thinking we know what's better, because, you know, we all come from different backgrounds. And I think those lads did a really good job of humbling some of us who maybe were a bit stuck in our ways or thinking too much about what we think makes boats go fast. Like, it's easy for me to get, you know, stuck into my Brookes mentality, which was very key to me becoming a good athlete, but isn't necessarily the only way to make a boat go fast. And I've sort of learned over the last couple of years that to make a boat go fast on the world stage, you've got to bring all of those Yale boys, Brookes boys, people from all over the world, well, from programs all over the world, and align ourselves. We can't come in and be stubborn. We have to buy into one idea. And I think actually buying into the same idea has been much more important for us than the idea itself.
Yeah. Obviously, world champion for the first time in 2022. I'm kind of going to just gloss over that, if you don't mind slightly. Just move you to the European Championships this year against Romania. Talk us through that final.
Yeah, so that was another incredible race, very similar to the Lucerne one that I told you about in terms of the finishing margin. That was honestly just an incredible race to be a part of, and really good sort of races to have in your locker. Like, being part of those races just sort of gets you ready for close races in the future and sort of is good experience to have. But we had a good. I think there were less than 6 crews there, 6 or less. So it was a preliminary race, and in the prelim we'd had a very sort of average row, but delivered quite a good margin. I think we won fairly comfortably in that. And I think this must be silly games from the other nations, or I think they, it's preliminary. You don't need to go. You don't need to win. It doesn't mean anything. So when we went into the final, we certainly weren't being naive. We were expecting them to up their game. But yeah, I think maybe that is a good example of us not being as internal as we like to be. As I said before, I've been caught looking out of the boat when I shouldn't be, and I've worked on that really hard. And over the last while, I've been better at that. But I think the conditions and the pressure they put us under made us deliver not our best pattern, and the process and the pattern of our rowing is the most important thing in our sort of philosophy of rowing. So they've put us off that, and they've achieved forcing not our best rowing on us, and they threw a lot at us, and in the last bit we sort of were just throwing the best strokes we could back at them, and the R8 sort of came together a little bit in the final bit. And as I said, I wasn't necessarily in my boat as much as I should have been, but I saw the Romanians come through us with probably 100 meters to go. Normally in rowing, that's it. If they're coming through you with momentum 100 meters to go, then it's over. But I just sort of remember getting my head down and pulling the hardest strokes I could along with my crewmates, and somehow we managed to get back through them, which was enough to win.
Yeah, it's a cracking race. 500s, wasn't it, or something approximating to that?
Yeah, crazy close.
So this season, which has just started, I mean, will you be in pairs for a long time? Are you going to row in 4s, or will you get out in the 8, or do you stick in the small boats for a long while?
So as I said before, I don't know what, if anything, I'm going to be selected in. So, I don't know which crew boats I'll spend the most time in, but we'll definitely spend a fair amount of time in pairs for the trial system. Obviously, it's the easiest boat to assess an athlete in, because you're responsible for 50% of the boat as opposed to a much smaller part of an 8. So we'll spend a fair bit of time in pairs, 4s as well, probably. But I think there will also be opportunities for the 8 for the selected boats that won't necessarily be selected yet, but an idea of what those boats might be to go out before then, to try and get everyone sort of used to different crew boats. But everyone will have a go in an 8, and everyone will have a go in a 4, I imagine.
Like you were talking, where you battled the other pair in Silveretta, and you were going way above. If it was UT1, you were maybe going towards AT or something. Are you allowed to do that at Caversham, or are you very strictly controlled with pulse meters and lactate testing?
So as I said before, I think I said at the start that at this sort of level, the coaches put a lot more trust on the athletes. So we are allowed to do sort of what we want. Like we can deliver the sort of training that we think will be best for us. So it's not like they'll say, you can't go this hard, but the coaches will have a very good idea of what intensity is correct for what you should be doing. And then it's our job to sort of go within that intensity and deliver what we think is best for us at the time. So maybe if they give you a sort of 4 split margin, if I'm feeling good, I'll be on the faster end of that. If I'm not feeling so good, I'll be on the slower end. But one sort of barrier to that sort of intelligent, smart training is sort of emotion. And one thing that I think has improved myself as an athlete over the last couple of years a lot has been sort of removing the emotional side of training. I say emotional, I more mean like, when you're side by side with someone, it can be very easy to get drawn into always trying to be up, or always trying to, beat the other crew, even if it's just, relaxed training.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that I've progressed as an athlete with, which has really helped me, is not getting drawn into that. You can decide before a session normally what your best training will be that session.
Yeah.
There's no reason why that should change during the session. So, I think a lot of the time I try and decide what I'm going to do in a session before I've started it and then deliver that. And if I come away having gone too hard in a session that was maybe UT1, then I'm disappointed in myself because I'm not delivering my best training. And it's not about beating other crews all the time. And that's also feeds back to what I was saying at the start, with coaches telling you explicitly, this is really important. You have to prove yourself all the time. They're giving you freedom to know when you need to perform, but also freedom to, lose maybe pieces that aren't test pieces, because that's best for your training. If your intensity that you need to go at is lower than, your maximum. And I think that sort of environment is healthy, as well as the environment of competitiveness, which still exists. Like, that's still there. And when we're side by side in racing scenarios, we are some of the most competitive environments, athletes in the world. But the best athlete will also know when to control that sort of competitive edge.
I'm just wondering, was it like that in Jurgen Grubler's squad, or was that sort of you need to win at everything?
So what I said about the culture that's come in this Olympiad, everyone sort of bands together and it feels like one big team, and sort of we're all friends and we're all sort of together. Whereas before, I feel like there were different groups of people and there was different sort of areas to the sort of crew room, and people wouldn't necessarily get on with everyone quite in the same way. And now I sort of get more of the feeling that if you're trying to pull harder to beat someone next to you, you're essentially trying to do in your teammate and someone who you actually care for and you'd like to do well. So I'd say back then there was less sort of incentive to train together and train side by side in a productive way. So it was a little bit more wild and people would be going after each other. And I think now the culture is really good, and I think people are a lot more sensible with the training, and we test against each other. And that is something that is at the back of our minds, like beating each other to get our seats. But, if you're stood behind someone on a 2K test in Caversham in a couple of months' time, or no, it's actually a month's time, we've got to do a 2K at trials. You'll see people on the same side cheering their teammates on. Like, we genuinely want our teammates to do well. And the sort of another part of the culture that has been so good that these new athletes have brought in is that they don't want to get a seat based on anything other than their best performance against the best performance of someone else. Like, if someone were to win a seat race against someone who had bad steering, I don't think they'd be happy about that. I think we all want the best people to get the best seats. So, I think we want the best from our teammates as well as ourselves.
That's pretty cool. So I'm guessing, because it's quite, I could ask you about, your Olympic dreams and things like that. Although I'm thinking, well, he's not going to answer that because he's basically, his focus is getting in the boat or doing good training to get in the boat. So can you allow yourself to dream of Paris, or is that like, I've got to put that away to one side?
So, in the way I've sort of been thinking about my training recently, well, not necessarily my training, but my racing, is I really try not to think about the sort of product of what we're doing too much. And that's very similar to the way Steve guides us in our training in the 8. It's not about the product, it's about the process. So you shouldn't be thinking in a race about the result or where you are in relation to the other crews. You should be thinking about the process you're putting in, and am I taking my hardest strokes? Am I delivering my best first 500, my best second 500, my best third 500? And the way I've sort of learned to deal with sort of pressure and racing and my expectations, because I've been through a lot in the team in terms of testing, and I've done countless bits of hard, like, individual testing where if I lose, I'm out of the team. And in my first couple of years, I worked so hard and wasn't necessarily given opportunities in crew boats that maybe my results at times granted. And I think you have to, in rowing, it's such a tough sport and it's such a difficult environment to consistently, gauge your expectations in. I think it's best to not worry too much about where you're going to end up and really not put too much pressure on that. And at the end of the day, as I said about the Olympic qualification regatta, I'm going to do my absolute best to get to the Olympics in my best form. And if I'm not in a seat, then, there's nothing I can do about that. And because I've done my best. And if I'm not in an Olympic medal winning position coming through the line, I know that every member of my crew will have done their best, and so have I. So I really don't feel the same pressure I used to, because I've really sort of unloaded that sort of burden of worrying about the results and have just focused on the process. Sorry, you've just frozen, Crossy. We'll see if Crossy comes back.
Yeah. So what happened there was my internet crashed.
Yeah, I thought it might have been yours. I was here running my own podcast.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Did you miss anything?
So no, so I'm on my phone. I think we were kind of pretty good in terms of like questions. It was a nice place to end in terms of what you were talking about, I think. And we've been talking about an hour and a quarter, which is just fantastic. Was there anything that we haven't talked about which you think people would be interested to hear?
Not too much else, to be honest. No, we've delved quite a lot into my rowing career. And 12 minutes is much more than I thought I'd be able to talk about myself for. Well guided by you, Martin. But thank you very much for your time, and thank you for having me on. It's been very enjoyable.
That's brilliant. So we'll end the live part of this interview now. Morgan Bowling, you're an absolute star. Thanks for being on Crossy's Corner.
Thanks, Crossy. Bye.